My name's Adam Sotak. I'm the Community Engagement Director here at NC Child. I've worked at NC Child since November of 2015, helping to direct our engagement work all across the state and to try to strengthen our North Carolina Child Advocacy Network. I love doing trainings like this and talking about advocacy and working with community groups to hopefully make the policy changes that we all want to see happen. I've been doing this type work in North Carolina over 20 years now. I'm a social worker by trade, but I have spent most of my career doing this policy advocacy and community-based work. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Lamine Perkins.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lamine Perkins. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Engagement at NC Child, and I work closely with Adam. I've been at NC Child since about 2019, but prior to coming to NC Child, I worked at Prevent Child Abuse North Carolina, so I'm very familiar with some of the names that I see coming up. Really excited to see so many new faces here today and about today's training. Before we begin, I just wanted to do a quick plug for one event that we have coming up in particular, and that is 2022 Kids. That is going to take place on March the 29th and 30th. It is a 2-day summit that is really focused on centering equity in our child advocacy work, in particular through centering the voices of folks most directly impacted. And so there are a wide range of sessions focused on different areas of advocacy. And so I invite all of you to register for 2022 Kids. Thank you, Claire, for putting that link in the chat to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. All right. So as we get started, to begin, I just wanted to start with a quick exercise that we picked up from our friend Greg Barham at Children's First and Communities and Schools of Buncombe County. To start, I'd like to invite you all to engage in the chat. I am going to read 2 words to you in particular, and I would love for you to enter into the chat what comes to mind. And Adam, if you could help me out by reading some of what you hear coming up, that would be great.
Yes.
So first, I'd love for you all to tell me what comes to your mind when you hear the word advocacy.
Speaking up.
Yes.
Fighting for, well-being, truth-telling, fight for, representing, support, being a voice for others, lobbying, representing a larger group.
Absolutely. All of that definitely comes to mind for me as well. Now I'd like for you to giving voice. I love that one. And fighting alongside, very powerful. Now I'd love for you to tell me what comes to mind when you hear the word public policy.
Government versus community, regulations, change, challenge, rules, greater good, rules to help others, standards, instructions for public programs or services, protection.
And so I'm sure that you all are noticing, just like I'm noticing, the different feelings that each of these words evoke. But I think the point of this exercise is really to emphasize that advocacy and public policy really do go hand in hand. And what we often see is that there are more positive feelings associated with the word advocacy than what we see associated with the word public policy. And so we hope that during today's training, that we're able to fuel your passion for both advocacy and public policy, because we know that effective advocacy really does lead to more equitable public policies for our kids and for our state.
Thanks, Lamine. So to do a little more background around what is advocacy, if you get nothing else out of this presentation today, we hope that you will just simply take away this. Individual advocates are important and needed. And true advocates not only do the work themselves, but they also empower others to advocate for themselves. You are all in positions of influence in one way or another, and you can use that position and the resources at your disposal to advocate for the greater good. And on these slides here, there's a couple, basic definitions that we like to talk about when we think about the word advocacy. And in the bigger picture, advocacy to us at NC Child, I think it's safe to say, is really about going beyond just immediately what's in front of us. And the larger goal ultimately is systems change, and it's prevention work. It's doing the things that make our government and our communities work better for everyone in an equitable way. And some actions that are associated with advocacy include educating the public with the purpose of bringing about change, influencing decision makers, and ultimately, again, helping to shape social and political outcomes. Advocates are community assets. That's another thing that we want to make sure that we emphasize. And while it's not talked about enough, the fact is that advocates help make history. To be an advocate is to be an asset to your community and to your state and to the larger world around us. And advocates are valuable assets, not only because of their courage and passion, but because the best advocates also have a plan and they know how to help create change. So a lot of what we talk about when we talk about being an effective advocate is not only having the passion and the courage, which are huge and which will get you a very long way, but also having a plan. We have to have a plan to help create change because it's very difficult, as you all know. And if we go into these instances without a plan, then more often than not, we're not going to be successful, because a lot of times advocates are up against some tough odds.
And I wanted to share this quote with you today. When we talk about helping to bring other voices into the advocacy process throughout the day, what we're really talking about is building power in order to achieve the policy wins that we want to see for kids in our state. So in addition to thinking of advocates like yourself as community assets, I really want you to remember this quote from an author that I love, Alice Walker. You all may be familiar with her work, The Color Purple. In this quote, it reads, "The most common way that people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any." And we hope that over the course of this training, as you're identifying ways that you can lean into your own advocacy, and as you are identifying ways to use your power, that you're also thinking about ways that you can build power to achieve policy wins for our kids in your local community and throughout our state. And so to that point, there are lots of different ways for us to be an advocate for others, and they all really have merit. They're all valuable and they are all important. On the individual level, there's things like the advocacy that many of us do for our own children. On the family level, there is the advocacy that happens for folks who are working in direct practice, caseworkers that may be advocating for a particular family, or a community member that may be advocating for a family with a particular need. But for the sake of this presentation, we are really talking about advocacy in a more macro level. We are talking about advocacy skills that are on that community engagement side of things. We find that this is where we are going to not only have the greatest opportunity to make the needed systemic policy changes that our kids need, but it's also where we can at times have the greatest impact.
Thanks, Lamine. And before we go to the next slide, I wanted to just ask folks if they would really quickly put in the chat, when you think about these different engagement opportunities, individual engagement, family or community engagement, which one of those buckets do you most see yourself in your work day to day? Just be interested if folks are willing to put that. Okay, I see community engagement. Yeah. All of the above. So yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a strong mix there of the three, and I think that that's true to form with most of us, right? Advocating on various levels. And again, what we're going to try to focus on for the remainder of this training is really thinking about some skills and some concepts around that community engagement piece, and that piece that will help us be more effective advocates in changing policies as we move forward. So the other thing that we want to emphasize here, this with great challenges come great opportunities, I guess you could say, and opportunity is knocking, folks. I don't have to tell you all some of the stressors that we've all been under over the past few years and that are continuing. And the truth of the matter is that lots of our children and families have been under stress for hundreds of years in our communities and in our country. And our advocates' voices are needed now more than ever. And there's opportunities right now for you to be heard on big issues that impact children and families. I think we're seeing a shift in a lot of the dynamics and some of the norms around how we view public policy in our country and how that's getting formed. So we need to be a part of that process. And whether at the local, state, or federal level, advocates are needed, especially advocates who inspire others in their communities to get more involved. So, in the chat, let's just take a minute again and, think about some of the opportunities that you see as an advocate for children and families right now. List some of those items that might come to mind, please. ARPA, yes, Jenna. Education funding. Opioid settlement funds. Public schools, mental health. Early ed, yes. Housing. Big things, big areas. ACEs, yes. Medicaid expansion. And so again, I don't have to tell you all know that there are so many things going on. And I would just like to say that specifically as part of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a series of opportunities that are ongoing right now for us to advocate around funding and to make some changes that many of us have wanted to see happen for a long time in the systems that we care about. So there's, things like the ARPA funds, there's ESSER funds, which were part of ARPA that's come down the line for schools. I heard somebody talk about on a different note, opioid settlement funds. Those are funds that are coming down to communities that can be utilized. There's all kinds of things that are happening. Of course, there's some of the elements of the Build Back Better plan at the federal level, which, as we know, has gotten stalled, but might present an exciting opportunity, for example, to inject a whole range of funds into the early education system, et cetera. And of course, with the issue of access to healthcare in North Carolina, we are closer than we ever have been. And 2022 really could be the year that, for example, we expand Medicaid in North Carolina.
Thank you, Adam. And so strong advocacy happens through a race equity lens. But what does this mean? In North Carolina, we know that children of color will soon be the majority. However, we also know that they face disproportionate barriers to their success due to some of the historical and structural ongoing racism that we see today. On top of these challenges, Black, Indigenous, and families of color also tend to be suffering disproportionately from the impacts of COVID-19. We know that good advocacy really has to be inclusive. It needs to be inclusive in order to combat the negative effects of systemic racism. And we know that our policies are either going to uphold or dismantle these systems of oppression. There's a growing number of race equity resources that we are seeing being shared in the community and that are available to help folks. Some of those are included in that toolkit that we referenced earlier today, but I also believe that you all are aware of what some of those resources are. And so as I'm kind of going through the remainder of this slide, I would invite you all to share some of those resources in the chat, share them with your peers from across the state, share them with us at NC Child, as this is an area where we are still learning and growing and trying to sharpen ourselves. And we believe that iron sharpens iron. So we would love to engage with you in sharing those resources. But the reason why we think that this race equity lens is so important is because I personally believe that the folks who are closest to the problems that we're trying to solve really know best what those solutions should look like. And so having a diverse and representative community of engaged advocates fighting for the key issues that will help improve our community are really going to improve our chances at being successful in achieving our policy goals. So not only is it the right thing to do from a moral imperative, but really it's the smart and most effective strategy for us to use as well. Which leads me to my next point. Not only is it our role to get involved in public policy advocacy, but in order to really and truly be successful, we really need to be facilitating participation of those folks who are most directly impacted by the policies that we're fighting for. We've already established that those are the folks who are going to have more expertise on these issues because they're navigating the very systems that we are trying to improve. And Carrie Ann is asking for the link to the toolkit. I will see if we can get that in the chat for you. So one example of this is when you think about an issue like a Medicaid expansion. Folks who are dealing with living in poverty and dealing with chronic health conditions are some of the folks who really have the most to gain by this systemic change. And those are the voices that we really have to center in our advocacy efforts, because we know that real stories from constituents can change the conversation and can make a difference, especially when it comes to educating elected officials and educating other constituents. At NC Child, one of the ways that we've tried to do this is through our community engagement efforts. In addition to our child advocacy network, which you all are members of, we also have our Parent Advisory Council. And that really has allowed us to center the voices and expertise of folks who best know the benefits and opportunities of North Carolina's Medicaid program and bring those voices to tables where the decisions about those programs are being made. This has helped us as an organization to better understand what are the needs and what are our blind spots? What are we missing in terms of areas where we need to be doing our administrative advocacy? But it's also been able to help the Department of Health and Human Services better understand how the intentions of their programs are actually showing up in the lives of families. And with them being able to kind of use their stories to identify some of the gaps and the barriers, they've also been able to use their knowledge and expertise to help propose solutions to those problems that they've identified. Watching how the PAC has been so impactful in our community engagement and in our advocacy has really led us to look at ways to do this in other areas of our work, specifically around centering youth voices and centering voices of childcare providers in our ECE advocacy work. Next slide. So now we are about to go into more of the specifics, concepts around our advocacy skills, but to summarize, when we look at advocacy, we're really trying to build resilient communities, and we're trying to create environments that not only buffer children from adverse childhood experiences, but prevent them in the first place. And we know that systemic failures are often at the root of childhood trauma, and we can advocate to make communities more supportive environments for our kids, which means that we can really advocate for resiliency. Adam?
Yes, thanks so much, Lamine, for some of that. Again, great background on, why we're advocating and some of the how that we're advocating. So we're about to get into talking a little more about some specific concepts around doing effective advocacy. And again, I encourage you to put any questions or comments you may have into the chat. And the first one that I want to start with is talking about advocacy and lobbying. So how many of you have ever heard in a nonprofit meeting or that arena, oh, we can't do lobbying, that's not allowed? Well, the truth is that we can, and that when we talk about advocacy and lobbying rules specifically for nonprofits is what I'm talking about here. What we're mainly talking about is IRS tax guidelines, and I'm not going to get into all the minutia of that. And there are attorneys that make a living from dealing with those type issues. But what we really try to emphasize at the baseline is that there is so much we can do to advocate for the issues that we care about in the nonprofit setting. We can do far more than we can't do. And I'm going to go through and talk about some of the specifics on what some of those things are. But it's really those IRS tax status rules, much more than statutes in any other area of law, that provide the guardrails by which the nonprofit organizations operate when it comes to advocacy and lobbying. Those guidelines clearly state that nonprofits can spend a portion of their budget on direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying activities, as well as voter engagement and advocacy related to key issues. All the activities listed on the next couple slides are permissible for nonprofit organizations and their staff and board members. So lobbying specifically, you can do this. And it's important to know that advocacy and lobbying go hand in hand. And 501c3 nonprofits are allowed to do a wide range of things in order to speak out for policies that will improve our communities. In fact, it could be argued that if we're not participating in advocacy and lobbying when we can to some degree, that we're not maximizing our potential as individual professionals, as organizations, or as citizens. And an old saying about advocacy is this: there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies in the world of policy advocacy. It's about the issues. And through lobbying, we can let our elected leaders know how we feel about specific ideas or pieces of legislation as they pertain to our mission and the folks that we're working with. And the more specific we can be with our advocacy, the better. So here are just some things that you can do along the lines of advocacy and lobbying as nonprofits. You can invite elected or appointed leaders to visit your organization so they can see how you make a difference. That's always a wonderful way to build relationships and to advocate. You can talk to community members about important issues and discuss solutions to policy problems. You can talk to the media about important issues in your community. These are all things that most nonprofits are participating in. For lobbying, you can ask elected officials specifically to vote for or against specific introduced legislation. You can email a call to action to your members or your email list, urging them to contact their elected officials regarding specific bills or legislative ideas. So the first example would be an example of direct lobbying, where you're going directly to the decision maker. The second example is an example of grassroots lobbying, where you're telling others to take action. And you can, of course, spend your time preparing materials or organizing events in support of lobbying activities. So things like grassroots calls to action, lobby days, all of those type things fit into the realm of what's permissible with the advocacy that we're doing.
One of the often overlooked keys to a successful advocacy campaign is really about choosing the right issue to work on. And it's important that we understand why we need to advocate for issues rather than problems. And so this slide kind of breaks it out a little bit, but as you can see, a problem is a broad area of concern, while an issue is a solution or a partial solution to a problem. One of the most important parts of advocacy is making sure that we are choosing your issue. It's making sure that we're not just focusing on a social problem and focusing on addressing issues like securing and promoting social justice and shaping outcomes in order to create systemic changes. So whereas problems tend to be broad areas of concern like poverty or child abuse or other things like that, an issue is something specific that can actually be changed, such as expanding Medicaid or passing laws to mandate paid parental leave for all parents. And once we identify our issue, then we have to think about how is it that we are going to frame that issue? How is it that we want to talk about that issue so that it connects with people's shared values and so that it inspires people in order to act? It really is worth spending some time and putting in some work in order to make sure that we're choosing the right issues before we spend valuable time and resources planning our advocacy campaign. Issue campaigns really do work within the larger context or frame of social problems. So for example, if the problem that we are trying to address is poor parental health, then the issue that we're going to advocate for might be Medicaid expansion or closing the health insurance coverage gap in North Carolina so that parents have access to both preventative care as well as treatment for chronic conditions. So now I am going to read you a few examples, and I would like you to use the reaction buttons on the bottom of your screen. You should see those options. And so if you could give me a thumbs up when I read the word if you think it's an issue, or a thumbs down when I read the word if you think it's a problem, that would be great. And I am going to move my screen so that I'm able to see more faces. Okay, thank you, Morgan, for demonstrating that. So global warming, thumbs up if it's an issue, thumbs down if you think global warming is a problem. Okay. See a few reactions coming in. So global warming is a problem. Solutions to address global warming would be the issues. So a climate change policy, for example. The next example that we have is limiting emissions from power plants. Thumbs up if it's an issue, thumbs down if it is a problem. Absolutely. Thumbs up is correct. It is, in fact, an issue. Child poverty. Thumbs up if it's an issue, thumbs down if it is a problem. Child poverty, I see 6, 8, lots of thumbs down coming in. Yes, for those of you that are identifying that as a problem, that would definitely be correct. Enhancing the federal child tax credit. Would that be an issue? Thumbs up, or a problem? Thumbs down. All right, it looks like lots of folks are coming in identifying that as an issue, which is correct. Okay, just a few more. Poor mental health for teens. Problem or issue? Thumbs up for issue, thumbs down for problem. Yes, definitely a problem. Legislation providing funds for more school-based professionals. Thumbs up for an issue, thumbs down for a problem. Legislation providing funds for more school-based professionals. And then the last one that we'll do here, low performing school, and that was an issue. So for those of you that had thumbs up, that was correct. Low performing schools is the last one that we'll do. Again, thumbs up for an issue, thumbs down for a problem. Yes, that is definitely a problem. And then increasing teacher pay and retention bonuses. Thumbs up for an issue, thumbs down for a problem. Absolutely, definitely an issue. Great job, everyone. Thank you for engaging with us in that way. And so now that we are able to kind of see the difference between solutions and problems and how framing is how we talk about those issues, we'll build on some of that throughout the day.
Thanks, Lamine. Had to get myself off mute. You would think that I would have figured that out by now over the past couple of years, but still have that problem. Thanks, everyone. I mean, and just to go back to the last slide too, I'm sure we've all seen instances where a campaign and an advocacy effort has not been built around an issue that was specific. And so therefore, it's not winnable ultimately. It creates confusion. It can burn out advocates, and volunteers that we have who are interested, because we have to be able to hone in on an issue that's winnable. And if we're able to win on certain issues, then that can build our momentum towards winning on other things as well. So when we're working on an issue, it's very important that we're able to frame that issue in a way that it makes sense to folks. And so having a connection to an issue and being able to speak about how it directly or indirectly impacts you, your family, your friends, or your community is the heart of strong advocacy. And storytelling is one of the most powerful parts of any effective advocacy campaign. It's the stories that captivate people's interests. That's what's going to get folks interested in being engaged. That's what's going to make the difference most often with policymakers. And if we're able to effectively bring those stories front and center for our issue campaigns, we're going to have a greater chance of being successful. But when we're talking about these issues and framing our message, one thing we have to think about always is who is our audience? And our framing and our messaging may change based upon who the audience is. So, working with other advocates to come up with some common messages that can be communicated is super important. And thinking ahead of time when you're talking about an issue about who is your audience and what are the points that are going to most resonate with them is something that we always need to be thinking of. And a framework that's really helpful in doing that. And this is not something that NC Child has come up with. It's not original, but we like it and it's been used and tested over time. A framework that we really like to think about is this problem, solution, and action framework. So it's kind of this idea of the elevator speech, right? If you were on a elevator with somebody, going up and you had 30 seconds to kind of talk about what your issue is, how could you frame that by talking about what the problem is, and then what the solution is that you're thinking about within that problem, and lastly, and most importantly, in some ways, what action can that person take to be supportive of coming up with that solution. So that problem, solution, action, and doing that in a way that fits with your values and makes the most compelling case is very important. So with the problem, a lot of times you just want to talk about kind of like one or two key facts or pieces of data, something that will really grip folks' interest. Like, did you know that sea level is going to rise by a foot by the year 2040? I don't know if that's exactly true, but I've heard things along those lines. But something that sort of lays out the problem there, we could think of lots of instances. Quickly move from the problem to the solution. Here's where you want to get the issue in. How can the issue be addressed in a specific way? So did you know that there's like 150,000 parents in North Carolina who are uninsured themselves? Well, one thing we could do about that is if we expanded Medicaid in North Carolina, we could provide coverage to the vast majority of those parents. So you're trying to get into the issue there and how it addresses the bigger problem. And then lastly, you always want a message to end in action. People want to know what they can do, and you need to be specific. So examples are asking an elected official to vote a certain way, encouraging the public to call a legislator, asking someone to write a letter to the editor. So for above, so something, if we expanded Medicaid, so we're hoping you will contact Representative so-and-so tomorrow and urge them to vote for Bill 123 that would help expand Medicaid. So you want to get into that specific action as well. And next, we have an example here that we just wanted to share with you all. This is from Canada, but it's a video that we wanted to show that we're hoping will show this problem solution action framework. And Lamine, I'm hoping that when I share this, the audio works and all that good stuff. We'll see.
Here's the problem. The BC government eliminated class size limits and support for kids with special needs when it illegally tore up its contract with teachers. So today in BC, we have 12,000 overcrowded classrooms, 700 fewer special needs teachers. Our kids are losing out, and our teachers are paying a price. Here's the solution. A new agreement that's fair and respected, that invests in classrooms, teachers, and kids again. That's why teachers are taking action. A message from BC teachers.
right. So thinking about that example there in the chat, tell us, tell me what you think was a strength of that of that video. It's short, yes. Providing numbers. Yep, some data rich, short and concise. Urgency affects all of us. Yep. Yeah, so, it's hard to come up with the perfect messaging, as we all know, but I think this video does a good job, like being short and concise and clear. There's just, it's huge. And there's so many times when I see advocates talking about issues or problems, and I'm just kind of left at the end of it to wonder, like, okay, what exactly is the issue here? How can I take action in order to help this? And our goal should be at the end of when we're talking about it, of course, folks are clear on those type things. Oh, hold on one second. Okay. So it's important that once we have a particular issue that we're working on, and we're thinking about our framing around that issue, we need to think about strategy and tactics. So we could spend days, and there are advocacy trainings and community organizing trainings that are days long that talk about how you build a successful strategy around your issue campaign. And as we go throughout the year at NC Child, we're going to try to bring up some more of those topics and dig a little deeper on some of those things. But just overall, strategy is the overall plan that you have, and tactics are the things that you do to implement the plan. So your strategy is your bigger picture, and then your tactics are like, okay, what are the specific actions we can take to build a successful strategy? And sometimes you may really want to do a particular tactic, but if you don't have the time and the resources to do it well, or the tactic doesn't have the right tone for the audience, then it will not be successful. And the next slide is going to show a scale that we think might be helpful in this. But again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to think about what tactics will work to push your issue forward. Time and time again, we see, quite frankly, some, tactics being used that aren't very strategic sometimes on issue campaigns, and it just doesn't move the issue forward. That being said, it's not to say that certain, in my opinion, that certain tactics are good or bad. And I think there is a time and a place for a wide range of tactics. I mean, all the way to the level of doing direct action, because that's what will help you be effective to achieve the issue. Wonderful things have happened throughout our history through that type of action, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it might just be writing a well thought out letter to an elected leader or making a phone call. There's a wide range of things we can do. So we like to share this here, which is basically a scale of impact. And so it shows what we feel like are some low impact type actions or tactics, some medium impact tactics, and some high impact tactics. And the thing that you'll see on this scale is that most often when you go up the scale for higher impact, you're also increasing the time commitment that it takes to pull those things off. So again, it's not saying that low impact or medium impact things are not important and good to do. But if we're able to pull off the higher impact type tactics, then those might really help push our issue campaign forward. So thinking about things along those scale, again, given the resources and time that you have, is very important. Sorry, y'all, I'm trying to get back into my presenter view. All right, are we okay, Lamine? Okay, so we've just got about 7 more minutes left in this section, and then we're going to take our break. But I just wanted to real quickly go through a couple things regarding the lay of the land. Another thing that is very important as advocates is that we have a solid understanding of the lay of the land related to the issues. And this is half the battle when it comes to being an effective advocate, and it'll help lead you down the right path. And we talk about lay of the land, we talk about namely who represents us. And in the next section of the training this morning, we're going to get much deeper into this, and we're going to be talking about meeting with elected leaders. But look at this list right here. This is, for most folks in North Carolina, these are all elected leaders that serve you. You have folks that are serving you at all these levels of government. You have folks at the local level, at the school board, your DA that you elect, your judges, your county commission, the state, the federal level. We have a lot of folks that are working for us, and we need to understand how we, who those folks are and, what they do essentially. So getting to know your elected leaders is very important as well. And Lamine is just going to talk about building relationships with elected leaders here for just a minute.
So as we saw on the previous slide, one of the highest impact advocacy strategies that we have in our advocacy tool belt is engaging directly with elected leaders. Getting to know our elected leaders and building a solid relationship really can go a long way. I know that this is something that we've worked to do at NC Child. We have a policy director, Tiffany, as well as a contract lobbyist who does a lot of this sort of work on behalf of NC Child for the issues that we're advocating for. But we've also been able to bring in the voices of champions, bring in the voices of folks who are most directly impacted, and to try to help to build those relationships. I think that, I know we'll talk about this more in the next half of the training, but one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that our voices are always going to have greater influence with the leaders if we live or serve clients in that particular district. And then I would say that, building those relationships by making phone calls, not only talking about reaching out to elected officials when we have an issue that we want to see addressed, but also reaching out when they have taken a stand that really is in line with the issues that we're advocating on behalf of.
Thanks, Lamine. And, part of knowing the lay of the land, and a lot of times we look at the North Carolina General Assembly, and there's, of course, different levels of government, but because so many of us are focused on what's happening with state policy, it's important to understand the lay of the land in the North Carolina General Assembly. And so in that body, we have 170 members total who represent the state of North Carolina. There's 120 members in the House and 50 in the Senate. The current political makeup of those bodies are 69 Republicans and 51 Democrats in the House, and 28 Republicans and 22 Democrats in the Senate. And you can find out who your legislators are by going online, and we'll talk about that. So the House is led by the Speaker of the House, and that's Tim Moore, currently out of Cleveland County. And the Senate is led by Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. And those are positions that are elected within the chambers. They're not elected by the voters at large. And most often, almost 100% of the time, the elected Speaker and leader of the Senate are going to be from the party that has the majority in the state legislature. Terms for House and Senate members last 2 years each. So every even numbered year, we have elections for all 170 members of our North Carolina General Assembly. Our legislators operate under a 2-year budget cycle and a biennium, and our state budget is around $26 billion per year right now, give or take. And the long session is the first year in the cycle, the odd years, and it runs from January until whenever. This past year, it pretty much went the whole year. And then the short session is the second year of the cycle that usually runs from early May until, again, question mark. One thing that folks don't know oftentimes is that we have a part-time legislature. Legislators in the state of North Carolina make on average about $14,000 a year. So it's this idea that they are able to go back and still, have a job and really be in their communities while also being legislators. But as we know, it's becoming more and more of a full-time job. Also, just for folks to know, and you're advocating and trying to reach out to these elected officials, most legislators, state legislators, they do not have big staffs. So if you're envisioning, a state representative's office in Raleigh and they've got 12 staff members buzzing about, that is very often not the case. Usually they have one staff member, and that is their legislative assistant that helps with their schedule and helps talk to constituents, et cetera. So oftentimes when you're trying to reach out to a legislator, you will most likely talk to that legislative assistant, or many times just the legislator themselves. When they're in session, they're usually, during the middle of the week is when they take care of most of their business. So, Monday nights, all day Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday mornings. And legislators serve on committees and subcommittees on dozens of topics, and this is where a lot of the work gets done. And so it's important to know what committees your legislator is on. And the best time to plan an in-district meeting, and this will be a good segue into our next training session, is, Monday mornings or Fridays or the weekend when legislators are in session. So that concludes all of the slides from our Advocacy 101 session here today. We are just about on time. I think we're coming up on 10:30 right now. Lamine, do you have anything to add before we take our break?
Just thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you in 30 minutes.
Absolutely. So if you are going to be tagging along for the second training session, and we hope that you will, we just invite you to go ahead. You can stay on the Zoom and just put your Zoom on mute, turn your video off and mute your audio, and then we will come back together at 11 a.m. Thank you.